Okay, we're going to start our tile project. And as I told you, we are going to start with making a slab. And then in each of the areas of our design that we put on the tile, we are going to create a texture or a pattern. And we're going to create that texture or pattern by either impressing objects into the clay or by making little shapes and adding them onto the surface of the clay. So that when you're finished, you're not going to see the lines of your design, you're going to see the different textures and patterns as they change from each section of your design. So the way we want to start this is with the slab. So to make a slab, we're going to take a piece of clay, and you want to start with probably a good 1.5 or 2 inches down from the top of your bag. Just cut a piece off. I've already done that, and I've already wedged it. So once I wedged it, I tapped it into a rectangular cube shape. So now what we want to do is we want to flip it and expand it to make it into a slab. So to flip it and expand it, we want the clay to hit on the surface of the board at an angle. If it hits at an angle, the clay is going to grab and stretch and expand. We don't want to body straight down on the board because it creates a lot of dust, a lot of noise, and it causes the clay to stick to the surface of the board. So if you think of it, it's kind of like skipping a rock along the water. You throw side arms so the rock comes in shallow and it hits the surface and it'll skip. So the same idea is we want our clay to hit the board and skip, and it'll cause it to expand. So we're going to hold it out in front of us, and we're just going to toss it lightly towards us. Okay? So it hits at an angle and hopefully skips. And as it hits at an angle and it starts to skip, the clay will start to stretch and expand itself. And as you keep doing it in one direction, you'll get a long, narrow strip of clay. But since we want our tile to be square, we want to stop when we expand it one way and turn it so that we can widen it and expand it the other direction. So we're going to do that back and forth. And when you get good at this, you can kind of eyeball what your thickness needs to be. And we're trying to get this to be about 1/4 of an inch thick, about the thickness of a pencil. Now I have a couple of molding boards or strips here, and they are exactly about the same thickness of the pencil. So I'm going to be using these as a guide and using a rolling pin or a tube or a dowel rod to roll out my slab to try to get it all to be the same thickness. So first of all, I want to flip it. So I'm at a point here where I think I have it right about where I would like it to be. Now I want your tiles to be 8 inches by 8 inches to start with. So you want to have a ruler on hand and make sure when you flip your clay it's at least 8 inches by 8 inches. If you got that, and then you're all set for the rest of it. So then I gave you guys some extra plastic bags when you came and got your clay. So before you cut this, my suggestion is go ahead and set it on top of the plastic bag. Okay? So I'm going to lay this bag down here, and then I'm going to drape my clay on it. If it's already on the bag, I'm not going to have to move it again. And if it's already on the bag and I use the roller, it'll help it not to stick to the surface of the board. And that way I can pick it up and move it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and cut a little bit off of the edge here, because I know I have more than what I need. So I'm going to cut myself a straight edge to start with. And I'm going to take this extra clay and set it aside. Okay? So then I'm going to go ahead and see if my roller is going to fit the width of that. And it looks like I need to cut just a little bit more off. But I don't want to cut it any less than 8 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and measure off the straight edge that I just cut and at the 8-inch mark. And so I'm going to line up on the mark and cut it so it's 8 inches wide. All right? So now I'm going to use these 2 sticks as a guide. And I'm going to use the rolling pin to roll this down some more to get it to be the proper thickness, because right now it's just a hair too thick. Now if you don't have a couple sticks as a guide, but you've got some magazines at home, you could take, say, 2 magazines and you could put them on each side, and that could be your guide, depending on the thickness of your magazine. But we're looking for something around the thickness of a pencil. So maybe a skin children's book, maybe a couple magazines, maybe a couple boards that are the same thickness. You just, excuse me, have to look around and see if you can find something that would make it about 1/4 inch thick. Then you're going to take your rolling pin. In this case, I'm using a rolling pin. If I didn't have a rolling pin, but maybe I had a dowel rod at home, or a piece of PVC pipe or tubing, or something like that I could use, then I would go ahead and use that. But with the rolling pin, I'm just going to go ahead and press down on this and work to expand the clay. And I would just want to expand it till it's the same thickness as what these boards are. As long as I don't have the boards wider than the rolling pin, it should hit the boards and it should give me the proper thickness. Okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and roll and expand that out. Once I have that where I think it should be, I can go ahead and take away the 2 boards. And now I want to go ahead and get one side nice and square. So since I happen to have the magazine here, I'm going to go ahead and line the magazine up on one of the straight edges, figuring that the magazine is a nice 90-degree angle here. And I'm going to make a mark at each end so that I know where to cut, so I get a nice square edge. Then I'm going to go ahead and take my straight edge and line up on those marks. And I'm going to go ahead and cut across and cut the clay. Then I'm going to take my ruler, and since I want this tile to be 8 inches by 8 inches, I'm going to go ahead and measure from my straight edge here to the 8-inch mark and make a little mark there. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to take my straight edge and line up on the marks, and then I'm going to go ahead and take my knife and I'm going to cut on the marks and take away that extra clay. Okay, so at this point I've got my nice 8-inch by 8-inch square that's going to be my tile, and I've got it to be about 1/4 inch thick, and so that should be perfect. Now if you don't have a couple sticks at home or a couple magazines and you're not quite sure if it's 1/4 inch thick, err on the side of thicker rather than thinner. Okay? Otherwise, if it's too thin and you start making impressions into it, it's liable to push straight through the tile and you'll go through the bottom of it. We don't want that to happen. Okay? So I'm going to leave it on this board, on this bag here, and at this point I'm going to get my sketch, and the one sketch that I chose out of all the different designs, and I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to lightly sketch out my design on top of the clay. So you're just going to take your sketch and you can kind of plan out where you need to put everything, and then just lightly draw your design on top. Don't push down very far, just light enough to see it. If you mess up and it doesn't quite look right, just take your finger or a sponge if you have a sponge at home and smear back over it. Once you smear back over it, then you can go back and you can redraw it until you get the proportions right, until you basically have taken your original design and just enlarged it to put on the tile. Once you've done that, we don't want this to dry out. So you can take your spray bottle and you can give it a spray or two of water if you've got a spray bottle at home. If not, you could sponge just a little water over it, or you could dip your hand in some water and just kind of sprinkle or flick it on there. And that'll do the same thing. Then I'm going to go ahead and take my bag and I'm just going to wrap it over it, kind of like you're wrapping a present. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fold this up. And that way I can pick it up and I can move it, or I can store it on the board and it's just fine. Now if you want to make sure it doesn't get any air or come open, you could actually flip it over upside down. And that's going to keep this sealed tight so it's not going to get any air, and it should stay nice and moist. And so if we do this as we work on it, we shouldn't have any problem with the clay drying out too much on us. Okay? Now, let's set this aside for a moment. So this leftover slab, you'll just go ahead and squish back up and put into your bag. If you want to wedge it first, you can wedge it first. If not, you can just throw it right back into your bag, set it on top, pull the plastic up, take your spray bottle or get a sponge with some water, or again, get some water on your hand and just flick it down in there. But give it some sprays of water, and then we'll go ahead and squeeze it, get all the air out as best we can. We'll go ahead and spin this, and then we'll twist tie it up. And as I showed you guys in the last video, we will go ahead and flip it upside down so that moisture stays at the top. And that way our clay will stay nice and moist until we need to use it again. That's about it at this point. Don't get frustrated when you're trying to flip the clay. It does take a little bit of practice. So in class, we usually have a piece of equipment called a slab roller, and it makes our slabs for us. We still have to go through the process of wedging our clay and flipping it and expanding it, but then we feed it through so it makes it 1/4 of an inch instead of using a couple of wood boards or a couple of magazines. But if you can get a piece of PVC pipe, a dowel rod, a rolling pin, that will help you in the process of doing this. Okay, so I will see you on the next one, and practice your wedging, practice flipping your clay and making slabs. See if you can go ahead and get your slab made and get it all cut out. All right?